Avengers! Assemble.
From the Avengers getting shawarma after saving the world, to an ant busting out some sick beats on the drums, the MCU has changed the game with their post-credit scenes.
Stark,
General.
you always wear such nice suits.
Touche.
But some of them don't really make a lot of sense, starting with the shawarmas. For Phase 1 of the MCU, most post-credit scenes were integral for setting up the Avengers and what came afterward. Maybe Captain America the First Avenger was the only exception, since the post-credit scene for that film was just a trailer for the Avengers rather than having any real deeper meaning. The final cutscene in the Avengers is a bit of a surprise though after the big Thanos tease. It cuts to the 6 tired heroes enjoying some shawarma after all the wreckage. It's not necessarily important in terms of plot, but it does bring a nice moment of silliness and fun for the audience. I mean, we get to see these characters all gathered together and having a well-deserved snack. What's the harm in that, right? This wasn't the first time a post-credit scene only served one purpose: to make everyone laugh. Remember Howard the Duck? It makes perfect sense that the post-credit scene in Guardians of the Galaxy was super comedic. So this scene actually fits the lighthearted vibe of the movie. The fans were treated to the sight of Baby Groot dancing his heart out. But then things got a little weird. The final scene featured the Collector, Cosmo, and a surprise appearance from Howard the Duck, who was the protagonist of a big Marvel film from the 80s. Howard's later seen partying it up in Contraxia and even fighting alongside the Avengers in Endgame. It's clear he's his own creature with ambitions, hopes, and a heroic streak. So why is it that when given the chance to escape from the Collector's collection in the post-credit scene, Howard just sits there, drinking and making jokes? He should be running away at top speed, but instead he seems to be in no rush and super friendly with the Collector. Then there's the fact that the scene opens with the Collector getting his face licked by one of Marvel's most powerful psychics. I almost had to pinch myself to confirm that this wasn't some kind of a fever dream. This whole thing screams random. The same could be said for when Grandmaster called a draw. It's no secret that Jeff Goldblum was one of the highlights in Thor Ragnarok. His portrayal as the Grandmaster had just the right amount of strange, eccentric, and villainous traits, making him both likable and obnoxious. Everyone was excited to see his return in a post-credit scene, even though the scene didn't really matter. The Grandmaster showed up at the junkyard of Sakaar and tried to win over his disgruntled citizens by declaring the revolution a draw. Needless to say, it didn't go well for him. Speaking of scenes that just felt a little out of place, let's not forget Rogers, the musical. If you're a big Marvel fan, then you probably know the Hawkeye miniseries was one of the best MCU and Disney Plus shows of all time. But I have to say, the post-credits scene didn't really have any importance for the future. Still, you can't deny that it was an enjoyable moment. It all starts early on in the series, when Clint Barton takes his kids to see a Broadway play called Rogers, the Musical, based on the Battle of New York. I mean, people were obviously excited to watch it, and they got to see a sneak peek of it in the post-credits scene. The citizens and all the heroes sang Save the City together. Another post-credit scene that messed with fans was Stan Lee's weird cameo. It isn't uncommon for Stan Lee to make cameos in Marvel movies. It was his thing. He did basically make the comics after all, but his cameo in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 confused everyone. While it's obvious that the cameo is poking fun at a longtime fan theory that he's been secretly portraying a Watcher this entire time, it also raises a few questions. For one, Lee talks about his time as a Federal Express man. But wait, that's a reference to his Captain America Civil War cameo, which happens 2 years after Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Does that mean Stan the Man is a time traveler? The last one of the 5 post-credits doesn't really clear things up either. Here we see the Watchers silently bailing on Lee as he complains, "You were supposed to be my lift home. How will I get out of here?" Is this what these cosmic entities do? Recruit, shoot through time and space, and abandon random informants on moons?
Intimate thoughts, my experiences with someone, it just cuts the weight of it in half. You know, it's like a snake swallowing its own tail. Everything comes full circle. And the fact that you've been able to help me.
Who knows? But one thing's for sure, it's definitely not as weird as this next scene, where we see an ant playing the drums. The first post-credits scene of Ant-Man and the Wasp left viewers in shock as Scott Lang got trapped in the quantum realm, just as Hope, Hank, and Janet were all snapped out of existence by the infamous Thanos. Little did everyone know that this would end up playing a big role in the Avengers time heist mission. But the second post-credits scene that came after that one was a bit more lighthearted. We got to see a shot of Scott's mostly empty home with a giant ant playing the drums. It turns out the giant ant was programmed to mimic Scott's daily activities, which explains why it was still playing when he was gone. At least, that's what the MCU's explanation of it was. But one thing I still want an explanation for is the Kraglin target practice scene. Kraglin's introduction to the MCU in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 wasn't exactly what anyone expected, especially with his debut scene being one of the 5 post-credits scenes. This poor guy tried to practice his marksmanship with Yondu's special arrow, but it ended up hopping right over and stabbing Drax. Thankfully, the big guy was perfectly fine afterward. The whole scene just felt really random. Not as random as the Frost Beast cameo during Jane and Thor's kiss. Thor: The Dark World certainly had its moments, but let's be honest, much of the film felt a bit meaningless outside of the introduction of the Reality Stone. Fortunately, Avengers Endgame was able to make this movie feel more pivotal in terms of the overall MCU timeline.
To find our will equal to yours.
But even with that being said, it still couldn't save the post-credits scene. The first post-credit clip introduced us to the mysterious The Collector and set up a major plot point for Avengers Infinity War. But what followed was something that left many scratching their heads. A brief moment of Thor returning to Earth to kiss Jane Foster with a Frost Beast lurking in the background. Natalie Portman, who previously played Jane Foster, didn't reprise her role for this moment, so Chris Hemsworth's real-life wife, Elsa Pataky, stepped in instead. They didn't show us her face though, so for all we know it was just Jane. I don't know about you, but I can swear I saw Natalie in the scene. Maybe I need to see a doctor. And speaking of doctors, remember Tony's therapy session? After a tough journey without his usual tech in Iron Man 3, Tony Stark needed some help to deal with the PTSD he had from his near-death experience in the Avengers. So he went to therapy, and the doctor he was talking to was none other than Bruce Banner. It was all a bit of a joke, and surprisingly, Bruce isn't the kind of doctor to help with PTSD, but Tony probably could have figured that one out himself. Of course, this was just a way for fans to get an extra peek at Banner's character after the credits.
It will be absolutely safe here in my collection.
It might not have been serious, but it certainly did give us all something to talk about. Well, those were some of the MCU post-credit scenes that just made no sense.